But I want to talk about the road to redemption tonight. A very specific woman in the Bible that I have huge respect for in the history of, if you read in the Bible, what an important role she played. And she was a woman who laid down her life for someone else. And she walked a journey, a road with another woman, and in the process, she found redemption. And I want to talk about this road to redemption. And I think all of us are on a road to redemption. If you've been redeemed, there's still more. If you have been saved, there's a calling. And if you've been called, there's a great inheritance there. I always look ahead, and my poor church are dragging on behind in a sense, because they're like, well, we're just here, but I'm continually looking over the hill to the next. And some of them just say to me, why don't you just look right here at what we've got? And it's so true, because as a visionary person, we always want to look ahead. And it's nice to be able to share that, because some of us have been looking here for so long that we need to look ahead. There's a road ahead. But I want to talk about this road to redemption. Who of you know who I'm talking about? Ruth. Ruth, to me, the story, I'm going to go through the story of Ruth very quickly. But this road to redemption is a picture of God's redeeming nature. He is the restorer and the redeemer of mankind. His whole heart is to redeem His children to Himself. We are lost until we find Jesus, but without God leading us to Him, we have no redemption. I thank God that I took a trip down to the South Coast when I was 18 years old, and the intention was to get stoned and drunk as much as possible. But on that bad road, I found redemption. But in this woman's case, she had a mentor in her life. And she followed her example, because she saw, as bitter as Naomi was, she was a bitter old lady because she had lost her husband. You see the story, the background. Her and her husband had hit hard times, and they moved from Israel or wherever they were in the place that they were in. Hello. And they went to Moab, a place where there was no famine at the time, and her and her husband and her 2 sons lived there for years, and her husband and her 2 sons actually passed away, but they had married Moabite women. And she was stuck between a rock and a hard place. And often our road to redemption starts when there's a rock and a hard place, and suddenly God shows us another way, and it's easy to take that route. But I felt like God said to me tonight that some of us are on an easy road, and it's much more difficult for us to find the road to redemption when there's clearly a much easier way to go. And this woman found herself in a situation where she needed to make a call. This is Ruth. So Naomi said to her, you know what? Our husbands have passed away. I'm going to go back to Israel. I'm going to go back to what I know, but I want you guys to stay here. You guys can easily find new husbands. All you do is you go back to your parents and you find someone else to marry, and life will be fine for you. You can just carry on. But I'm going to go back to my own land, and I'm just going to be bitter there because God has been harsh to me. God doesn't love me. You know when you feel like that? I'm just going to go back and sit and eat worms, and I feel sorry for myself. We get to that point where there's just nothing else. There's no other solution but to go back home with your tail between your legs. You've given it a shot, and there's just nothing left. I'm going home. But she gave them an option that looked great. She gave the 2 daughters-in-law the option of going back. And I want to read to you from Ruth 1, from verse 1 to 5. It says, in the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land. So a man from Bethlehem in Judah, together with his wife and 2 sons, went to live for a while in the country of Moab. The man's name was Elimelech, and his wife's name was Naomi. And the names of their 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. And they were Ephraimites from Bethlehem, Judah. And when they went to Moab, and they lived there. Now Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with 2 sons. They married Moabite women named Orpah and Ruth. And they had lived there about 10 years. Both Mahlon and Chilion also died. Naomi was left without 2 sons and her husband. I want to say this is the first point that I want to make from here, is that redemption can only come to a lost cause. Our redemption from Jesus Christ comes at an absolutely hopeless moment. It comes at a moment where there's no more options. And friends, when you thrust yourself into the things of God, there's no more options. You have to trust in God. You have to walk with God. You have to put your trust in God. But often, before we get saved, if we're on the road of comfort, and it's easy, it's much harder to make the decision to do what God wants you to do. But what's wonderful about God's redeeming nature is that when we get to rock bottom, that's where God gives us our inheritance. So if you're in that space where you're at rock bottom, if you're in that place of hopelessness, if you're in that place of no return, that's the place that God meets you. Not only does He meet you, but He gives you a much greater inheritance and a much better future than you could ever have done yourself. But you might be in that place of comfort, and God might be bringing you to the place of change, of direction. It's going to be a bit more difficult for you. Both women needed a solution. Both Naomi needed to go, and she needed to be looked after. She needed to be taken care of in her old age, but she had absolutely no one to look after, because your husband or your sons, it was their duty to look after you as a widow. She had no more, she had absolutely nothing to provide for herself. She was just going to go back and hope for the best. And then she gave up of her life and said to them, you've got a chance. You can remarry and someone else can look after you. But you know what the thing is, friends? God does not have impossibility in His vocabulary. I stand here and I know without a shadow of a doubt that there is nothing that is impossible for God. I have lived in an impossible situation since I have walked out into the great unknown of what God calls you into, and it is the greatest, most incredible adventure when you walk into the fullness of God, when He calls you to step out in faith, when there's absolutely no way of return. Most of us make every excuse never to walk that road because it's much more secure to think with our senses and make our decisions about what road we take. If she had thought with her senses, she would have just quickly gone and found another husband very easily, because she was obviously a woman. That would have been a bit weird if she was a man. But she was a woman of virtue. So she could easily have found someone else. And very often we make decisions based on what our senses tell us. We need to be asking God for more impossible situations that we can see more of His powerful work. But it's difficult to do that, friends, when we've never taken that step. We've never lived in that place of total trust with Jesus. Because you know what? When we get born again, we suddenly are trusting in Jesus. But when He calls you into your inheritance, and He calls you into whatever He's calling you to, whether it's to plant that church or start that home group or do whatever is totally uncomfortable for you as a calling, it's not easy. And that's where we need to be walking into the impossible to see God meet us. Because God meets us when there's absolutely no options in front of you. When we give ourselves no option, God becomes incredible. He becomes amazing. He becomes your life source. But as long as there's an option of out, it's like a marriage. If you have the back door to your marriage, you're always going to be knocking on it. But if you brick up that back door, it's hectic. Because you've got to fight it out somehow. You can't say, well, I'm going to go then. And then they'd probably say, well, I wish you would. But there isn't an option. And I've said that before, but I don't have the option. Well, then that's fine. Well, I'm just going to ignore you then. But I can't leave you. But I'm stuck in this. And sometimes we need to be stuck in something to go through something. How many of you have been in business or are in business? What about when those suppliers or those customers don't pay you? What about those moments when you got to pay your staff? I've been there. I've been there when all the elders tell you this deal's going to be sweet. Go for it. And then you're suddenly sitting with hundreds of thousands of rands worth of debt, and you've never been a man of debt. And you're sweating bullets at night, and you don't know what to do, and you're stressing and all of these things. But God, you said, I must do this. It's in those moments that God becomes real. But if you're trying to avoid all of those things, God will never be really real to you, because you've got options. In verse 8 to 9, it says, Naomi said to her two daughters-in-law, "Go back, each of you, to your mother's home. May the Lord show you kindness as you have shown kindness to your dead husbands and to me. May the Lord grant each of you, may the Lord grant that each of you will find rest in the home of another husband." Even the very lady that she was going to follow was trying to urge her to go towards what was naturally going to be the right solution. When I was going to go into the ministry, well, to start the business at that stage, I knew that I was going to plant a church at some stage. I got faced with the most incredible business opportunity, well, an opportunity for me to move in the company that I was in, and I was going to become a branch manager more than likely down on the coast. I was given that opportunity, but that was the red herring. But you know, the guy that led the church, he was as blunt as this. I said to him, "What do you think I should do? I got this great opportunity." He said, "I don't think you should go." "I don't think you should go." "No, because we've got a great plan for you, because God thinks you're amazing." I said, "I don't think you should go." And that was the end of the conversation. "Oh, okay, well, that's fine." That gave me more reason to want to go. But because I was listening to God, I didn't do that. And I started my business, and then 2 years later, we planted the church, which is now Frontline People. I want to just say, friends, naturally and more easily would have been that route. I would have been a director in the company. I would have been a different person. But I was faced in that moment of comfort versus the adventure of God. Friends, the adventure of God is scary, hectic, crazy, ridiculous, tough, skinny. It's all of those things, but it is well worth it. Because this is the point I want to make. We can have redemption, or we can have relief or comfort. Redemption, in the long run, is awesome, but relief is temporary. Relief, we see immediate results. Friends, we live in a life that is bent around immediate results. When I went to gym, I never got big because I never took the stuff that they did. But I tried to get strong, at least. But the thing is, it was very easy to just take substances to make yourself look bigger and stronger. And you could push the weights, and you could do all of those, and you got instant results. But there were other instant results that came with that. I'm very glad I don't have them. Because that's the thing, when we take the path of least resistance, is what someone once said, is it makes men and rivers crooked. Friends, in the call of God and the redemption of God, there's nothing cheap. It was not cheap for Jesus to die on the cross. It was not cheap for us it's never cheap for us to walk this road of faith. It is never going to be Manskein and Rosa, as they would say in Brakpan. It's not. But it's going to be awesome. The problem with relief or comfort is that it often runs directly in contravention to the plan of God. When we're making comfort decisions or life decisions, we need to make sure that they are God decisions. And God might be calling you to comfort for a season. I'm not to say that the season that God's calling you into is not supposed to be the one of comfort right now. Because maybe your family are just so dry and weary and dreary that they could not possibly take another step. But then you've got to ask yourself the question, how many bad steps have I taken to get them there? That we're so dry because we haven't been in the things of God, that we need a new adventure that Christ has set us on, and it's going to cost us everything. Guys, I am an adventure movie freak. I love the 300s and the gladiators and the sort of, Heather? The Notebook, yes. Because that's a cool adventure that all men need. That's always part of the fun. But there's something that it puts that desire inside of you to want to go and conquer something. But the world of comfort makes us as men tame. Because let me tell you something. You can't say that you're courageous and you battle worn and ready when you've never gone into battle. I'm not going to say that I'm just this great soldier and I'm ready to go to battle for South Africa, because I've never stood in the front line. I've never felt what it's like when bullets are flying over my head. But I have felt what it's like when I don't know where the next meal's coming from. I don't know what the next meeting's going to happen. I don't know whether we have transport tomorrow. I don't know what we're going to do. I have no idea. But it's in those moments that God becomes real. Friends, we grow up quickly when we get thrown in the front line. We grow up very, very quickly. Sometimes we grow old. But at least we grow. We need to. God's plan is good for everyone, not just yourself. When we do what God calls us to, it's good for us. What Ruth decided to do was to follow Naomi. What it meant for her is that she would have this battle axe that was grumpy, that God had abandoned her. She would have that grumpy old lady with her, but she would be following her. So she let go of everything that would be sensible. Who would not want to leave your mother-in-law behind and go and find somebody else? Who wouldn't want to get rid of the old bag? But you know what happens? She saw that God was in Naomi. She knew that redemption was with the Israelites. She knew something of what Naomi carried. I'm going to run right ahead of myself. This decision that she faced, like many of us or will, guaranteed relief and possibly an exciting new life in a comfortable culture. That was what awaited her. Satan loves to throw that bait out our way, especially when you're going through a hard time. Or she faced this, a miserable in-law, a burden, and that she didn't know and would possibly be hostile towards her as an alien in that nation. When God calls you, He calls you often into circumstances and situations that look pretty bleak at the time. But you know what she knew? She knew wherever that woman goes, that's where God is. And I'm going with that woman. I'm going with her. The next point I want to make comes from verse 15 to 18. Look, said Naomi, your sister-in-law is going back to her people and her gods. Go back with her. But Ruth replied, this is awesome. Don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go. And where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, even if death separates you and me. Then Naomi realized Ruth was determined to go with her. She stopped urging her. Friends, too often we have people that ask us to follow them. Discipleship, this is a point I want to make. Discipleship means following somebody else. You don't just follow Jesus and not follow people. Friends, you have to find somebody. You have to find somebody that you latch onto and that you follow. That person will lead you to where Jesus is, will lead you to redemption. Now, I'm not saying that we mustn't follow Jesus and follow blindly people that, people are people. But the truth is, anywhere in history in the Bible, we read of people that followed people into their inheritance. That's what the church is about. That's what people that are leaders in the church are all about. They lead you into a better place. There comes a time where you have to leave your stuff and follow the people that will help you walk into a greater future. I've had mentors all throughout my relationship with Jesus. But you know what? When I came to lead a church, I thought, well, I am that leader. I no longer need any of those. And I quickly fell on my nose. And I was like, Jesus, help me to find somebody I can follow. Because it's lonely here. It's very lonely. There's no one to follow. They all need to follow me, and I don't know what to tell them to do. I need to follow somebody. And friends, you're going to have to find somebody. Society has contributed to our bad understanding of discipleship. It's become so selfish, and the world encourages you to isolation and self-leadership because I am a leader myself. Friends, we need somebody. You need that somebody to lead you. That's what when Jesus says, go and make disciples. In other words, you be that disciple, or you go and disciple someone else once you have. That's what church leadership is all about. It's just discipling more and more people. And they disciple those people, and they disciple other people. But the truth is, Paul even said, follow me as I follow Christ. When you find that person and God says you follow that person, very often that person is good for you for that season, however long it might be. I promise you it works. And then you come to a time where that relationship might not be that same way anymore, and then it's fine. You don't just say, well, I don't need you anymore, and you run away. You still remain friends, but you don't have to be following them quite the same way they used to because you've grown up. Don't stay your mentor forever, because you generally tend to grow up. You don't necessarily outgrow them, but you need to move on to the next. She understood this principle. Friends, I want to drive this thing home, is that we need to be discipled by other people. Is that okay? Because those people, if they're the right people, will not lead you to themselves. They will not lead you to a selfish, lifeless inheritance, but they will generally be the ones that God has laid in your life to help you, lead you, mentor you, take you through to the other side and help you to become a bigger, greater capacity and often take you into a much bigger inheritance. Don't be naive and believe we just follow Jesus and no man, because it's not biblical. We don't watch TBN to get the greatest fix. We don't isolate ourselves from the body of Christ, because in the body of Christ we get discipleship. We don't have dislocated members. It would look weird if the head was attached to a dislocated ear. It would look gross. It doesn't work on an ear. It works on a neck and a body. Jesus is the head of the church, and we are part of that church. Is that okay? Joshua followed Moses. Elisha followed Elijah. The point is that the greatest prophets and people they followed, and Jesus followed wholeheartedly, followed his Father. Devoted himself, he followed his Father every day. The next point that I want to make is in Ruth chapter 2, verse 5 to 12. I'm just going to read that quickly. Boaz asked the overseer of his harvests, who does that young woman belong to? This is when she had already come through and she had followed and she had let go of everything and she was with her mom-in-law and she was miserable here at this side, I'm sure. The overseer replied, she is the Moabite who came back from Moab with Naomi. She said, please let me glean and gather among the sheaves behind the harvesters. She came into the field and has remained there from morning till now, except for a short rest in the shelter. So Boaz said to Ruth, my daughter, listen to me. Don't go glean in another field and don't go away from here. Stay here with the woman who worked for me. Watch the field where the men are harvesting and follow along after the woman. I have told the men not to lay a hand on you. And whenever you are thirsty, go and get a drink of water with the jars the men have filled. At this, she bowed down with her face to the ground and asked him, why have I found such favor in your eyes that you notice me, a foreigner? Boaz replied, this is incredible, friends, and this is what happens when we take the steps in God. This is when things start coming right for you. I have been told about what you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, how you have left your father and mother and your homeland and come to live with a people that you did not know before. May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. God blesses and recognizes and rewards our acts of obedience always. He always will. It may not happen in your time. It may not happen in the timing where you think it should have happened, but I can promise you there's no act of obedience that will not be rewarded. When you act out of obedience, God will reward you with much greater than you ever could have sacrificed. Okay? When we get uncomfortable in order to be in contention, we have to get uncomfortable in order to be in contention for true favor. We have to get uncomfortable in God's call. When I came to Brakpan, I had no idea what I was going to face. I thought we'd walk in there, we'd turn everything upside down, God would move incredibly, and we would be in the pound seats, and everything would be amazing. We were wrong. Everything got very unamazing, very quickly. But things started to go well for us personally. Even though the circumstances and people still were the same people, the church was still the same, hardship still came and went. In planting Brackpan, I want to share with you a couple of the amazing things that have happened to Shannon and I. Can I do that? Some of the blessings. Number one, we had a house that was built, a 400 square meter property house under Ruth, by a friend of ours that not only felt that God said that we should come and stay there, but we helped design that house for ourselves. So the houses were designed around our the 4 bedrooms at that stage. There were 4 bedrooms, and it was a brand new luxury home that was given to us for just about no rent. It was brand new. Not even the owner of that property had ever lived in a brand new home. God said, I want to show you some of my goodness. Even though things were rough, they were hard. We battled to fill those cupboards up with food. The great big fridge that was standing in front of us wasn't always full. There was food on the table, but we lived in this mansion of a home. It was incredible. We lived in the blessing of God for that season. That came to an end, but we were given an even better place because it suited our family even better when that came to an end. We now live in a house that is absolutely phenomenal. It's beautiful. It's not Brackpan. It's not typically what you would see in Central. You know what I'm saying? God has been good to us. I've been overseas for a number of trips. I'm going overseas again with my wife to the nations doing the work of the ministry. That's incredible. God continues to provide. I was given a car. Of course, we prayed seriously for that car, and God provided. But you know what? It wasn't through our money, what we sweated, but we sweated in another way. People think this. When you're in church full-time, you don't work. We work for you, and we pay your salary. Footsack. You do not pay my salary because you guys are not all that consistent, I just might add. When you get into a hard time and Kippy needs a salary, I can't just go and find a job when God says, you're full-time. Then I got to trust Jesus. Because, man, you guys drop us as much as we drop you. It happens. None of us have it all together. So, I was given this car. Our kids, I said to God, what do you want me to do with my kids? Because there's this private school, and in Brackpan, unless you send your kids to an Afrikaans school, the English options are not all that great. So I wanted to get our kids into this private school because in the area there's a great place for us to plant a church. And I said, Lord, my purpose is to plant this church. Let me get my kids in here so I can build community. But I couldn't afford the fees. I said, Lord, if you can do this, then I'm blindly putting my faith out there, and if you can provide for them, then let them accept my kid. Because they normally check your bank balance. They normally check what's been through your account. It's like, Jesus, please do not let them look at my bank account. I was like, Jesus, because I know there's no ways. But we lived in that mansion, in that area. They just knew where we lived. They didn't care because that was the rich area. So we were okay. And that's just the reason why we stayed in that home, so that we could get our kid in there, that God could provide. And at the end of the day, we didn't have the money at the time. I said, Lord, I'm putting it out there as a fleece. If they accept, then you're going to provide. They accepted immediately. Now I've got 3 of them in there. 3 of them. I'm still trusting God. But you know what's amazing is that I've started to coach the sport there, and I've got a whole bunch of kids saved in that school. 2 years in a row. Those little boys. Soccer player. I mean, I don't know about butt from my elbow about soccer. I pretend I do. But I teach them how to play it. And I fooled my way through everything. I did pretty well last year. I only lost 1 game. But, yeah, 1 try. Yeah, by 1 try. And they gave their life to the Lord. Again, in this year, I was like, okay, fresh, let's do this again. These 2 kids start weeping because they accept Jesus. So emotional. Wrecked, undone at 9 years old. And I'm like, God, that's why I'm in this school. And 3 of my kids, they've got bursaries now because God looks after us. When we're not scared of failure, we're not scared of taking those steps, God makes a way. We've been given holidays when we've been bone dry, when we've been like ready to let go of this ministry. Throw it away, kick everybody in the church right out, and stop this church. Someone gives us a holiday. And we're like, thank you, Jesus. Let's leave this church for 3 weeks. We don't care if it's not here when we come back. Because believe it or not, Greg also felt like this years ago. He makes it sound like it's glorious now, but back then I'm pretty sure there were moments when he wanted to run away. It's just people don't share those stories because it's a long time ago. But there were rough times. I can tell you that now. Now I love the church. I don't want to be away from it. We paid to follow Jesus. I was given 2 pedigreed dogs, ones that I always wanted. And someone gave them to us. They were very naughty. That's why they gave it to us. When people give you gifts, it's because they don't want those gifts. But they've become amazing now. Now that they're mooi op hulle plekke. They know where to be now. My son was given a motorbike. I couldn't afford one. My son was given one. It's incredible. It's humbling when you get given something. But when you know, actually, Jesus, I'm fighting another battle. God said, you look after the poor, I'll look after you. For now. That's what we do. Some have contributed to our income. Guys, and every time it's happened, it's when our church has let us down. Or people have let us down. And like, thank you, Jesus, you put that money in our account. May God, you bless that person abundantly, amazingly, fantastically. But God's done that. And that season has changed. But it's incredible how God does these things. The key is, friends, in this passage of Scripture, I want to read this to you. Again, Boaz replied, I have been told all about what you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, how you left your father and your mother. When you get called by the things of God, you leave the comfort of where you are at. You don't have to necessarily leave town, but you have to leave your comforts. You have to leave what you, like when you start tithing, it's hectic because you rely on that money. But then you see God provide for you when you step off the cliff. All of these things, it's all about us taking steps of faith to start trusting God. She gave up her life to take up the uncertainty of relocation and the burden of looking after a family member. She set herself up for greater success in God's unknown. And number 3, she came under the cover of the one and only true God when she took that step of faith, a guarantee of success. Just one single act of obedience could change history. In chapter 4, verse 15 to 17, I want to read the final part. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age. This is what he says to her. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you, who is better to you than 7 sons, has given him birth. Naomi took, this is the child that when Boaz married her. You see what Boaz did was, she started gleaning the fields over there and she found favor with Boaz, and Boaz then took a shining to her, and he happened to be a family member of Naomi's. How incredible is that? And it was always your closest relative that could redeem you. So there was one other relative, but he didn't want to take the wife and the land. He just wanted, he was pretty clever. He got out of the deal. But Boaz was less clever. He took the wife and the property. He actually got a good wife. But you missed that one, but it's okay. You guys are a bit slow. Then Naomi took the child in her arms and cared for him. The woman living there said, Naomi has a son. And they named him Obed. And he was the father of Jesse, who's the father of David, who became the ancestor of Jesus Christ. One woman's act of obedience to lay down her life changed the course of history. Just because she followed something that just didn't make sense. Just one single act of obedience could change history. You could change history by making a decision of obedience to Jesus.